Okay, here's my last section of the course for me, okay? I'm gonna now summarize kind of what we've done in this lecture, and we're gonna compare these two models that we saw, the Solow model and these Keynesian models of growth, okay? So first of all, let's talk about our summary of experiments from the Solow model, okay? And this is pretty important. What does the Solow model say? It says that increases in S, the savings rate, or increases in little n, the rate of growth of the population, will have a one-time level effect on output per worker. Okay? And likewise, growth in capital has its limits, right? It only can increase up to some point, and then it's not going to lead little y to increase anymore, for the reasons we saw. Okay, so therefore, any of these changes do not affect the long-run growth rate of little y, of output per worker. Again, we kind of mentioned this already. And so since neither one of them, neither S nor N, tend to be constantly increasing or decreasing, they cannot explain long-run growth in y, in little y, output per worker. And the only thing that can explain it in the Solow model is increases in Z, technological progress, increases in this technology parameter. Those are the only things that can possibly explain, in the framework of the Solow model, the only things that can possibly explain growth in output per worker. Okay? That's an important point. Now, in some sense, this is a disappointing result, right? We might say, well, what causes the increase in Z? Because really, our result is saying the main driver of growth is exogenous to our model. I mean, it's not really so much a model of economic growth, because if your question is, well, what causes the economy to grow, the answer is something I'm not even modeling. I'm just assuming is exogenous. One way of talking about it is people say, in the Solow model, technology is like manna falling from heaven. It's just given to us, There's nothing happening endogenously in the model to create the Z. So in some sense, it's kind of disappointing, In fact, Solow, I believe, referred to Z as a measure of our ignorance. It's all those things that are leading the economy to grow that we can't measure directly, okay? Now, I'm going to mention this, although I won't talk about it in detail, that this has led to important developments called endogenous growth theory, where people try to discover what it is that's changing this Z, what's leading to technological progress. Why is technological progress high in some countries and low in others? These are important questions. And these are kinds of the things that endogenous growth theory is interested in answering. Okay? So that's point one I want to make. Point two is about stability. Okay? So although that's, this growth result we just saw is kind of disappointing, Solow certainly was successful in creating a growth model that's stable. It doesn't succumb to these two problems of instability that we saw in the Herod-Domar model. Okay? Now, what gives us this stability? This is kind of an interesting question. Now, Solow claims that the difference between his model and the Herod-Domar model is that he uses this neoclassical production function. If you read his paper, that's what he talks about in the beginning. He says, Herod and Domar get these unrealistic results, and it's because of their unrealistic assumption that you have fixed proportion technology. Now, if you ask me, I don't know how unrealistic this is, but in any case, so he says the neoclassical production function is more realistic, and that's what's leading to these more realistic results. Well, can this be the cause? So let's think about this. Imagine we have that fixed proportions technology, that fixed proportions production function. Remember, it would look something like this if we put little k, or capital per worker, on the x-axis. Here I have a case where the fixed proportion is 1. I need 1 unit of capital for every worker. So you can think about my example with the computers and computer programmers. Okay, so as we increase k up until it's at a ratio of 1 to 1 with n, it has an effect, and then after that it doesn't. Now let's put this into the framework of the Solow model. What would it look like? Well, not that different actually than what we saw before, right? With the neoclassical production function, this certainly becomes smoother, But in either case, we get these points of intersection. And so in the same way that you get equilibrium in the Solow model, you could get it in a case of fixed proportions technology. Okay? So this, then I say, stability is perfectly possible with fixed proportions, so this can't be it. This certainly can't be the only thing. So what's the difference? Well, actually, I think there's two. One I've talked about already, and that's that Solow just assumes full employment, right? He says that prices are going to adjust to bring about full employment. We don't even have to worry about aggregate demand. Just assume employment is full employment. So by assumption, we can't have labor supply growing at a different rate than than labor demand. NS and ND, by assumption, are growing at the same rate. Okay? And so, therefore, we can't have a lot of these instability problems we had with Herod and Domar, where the two are growing at different rates, just by assumption. So that's one. And the last comes from, this is kind of the last point I'm going to make to you in this course, is about what causes investment. And this is kind of an important question. Okay? So the two models have very different views about what causes investment and what the relationship between savings and investment is. Okay? Let me be clear. In both cases, we have that savings is equal to investment. Okay? In the Solow model, remember, we have that investment is just equal to little s times y. And in the Keynesian model, remember, I showed you y investment is just equal to total savings. Okay, so it seems similar, but in fact, the two are very different, and here's why. In the Solow model, investment is the result of savings. Okay? The choice to save happens first, and then the savings become investment. Right? So in the Solow model, what do we have? Income increases, which leads to higher savings, and then this higher savings leads to higher investment. That's the, chain. That's the logical chain. So here I have savings causes investment. What about the Keynesian model? Well, that's not the case. In the Keynesian model, investment is somewhat exogenous, right? We said that investment happens and it injects income into the circular flow of income and leads to this chain of, consumption responses. And in fact, if you assume that investment is about trying to hit this capital to output ratio, as Herod does, then investment is caused by the need to create machines to meet aggregate demand. But what's important is that savings doesn't have to happen before investment does. Okay. Investment will happen first because firms say, aha, I need to buy more machines, I'm going to invest. Okay. Savings isn't a necessary prerequisite. And then we still get that investment is equal to savings, but this is for the reasons we saw before. It's because eventually this investment flows through the economy until it's all saved, leading to investment equal to savings. So importantly here, investment causes savings, not vice versa. Okay, so this, right now seems a little obscure and abstract. Fine. But I'm going to show you why it's important, okay? So why does it matter for stability? So here's my kind of summary. What causes investment? In the Solow model, it's savings, right? People save and that immediately becomes investment. In the Keynesian model, it's about I'm investing to meet expected demand growth. Okay, I expect that demand is going to grow by some amount next year, and so I'm going to invest to try to meet that demand. Okay, I don't need to look at how much savings are in the economy, I invest without that. In the Solow model, what's the cause of output? Well, given capital and labor, we put it into the production function and that gives us output, supply determined. In the Keynesian model, investment flows through the economy, is slowly saved away through our chain of consumption, so through this circular flow of income, and that's eventually what determines Y, total output. Okay? So in Solow, investment is caused by savings, output is given by the production function. This is what I said before. And so as K increases, this generates less and less savings. Okay, so as I invest more and more, less and less savings are created, therefore capital expands less and less, and we get this stability. But that's not the case in the Keynesian model, right? In this Herod-Domar model. So in that model, investment is caused by anticipated growth in income. And then output is the result of the circular flow of income, which we saw here. So here's why we can get instability then. As Y and K increase, there's nothing that necessarily brings them into a stable growth path, right? In fact, as we saw before, it can be the opposite. Investment increases and then increases output potentially even more and more. And we can get this instability. And this is really what's driving the differences in stability, is these different views about how investment relates to savings. If you put these two functions into the Solow model, you could get instability, regardless of your production function. It's about this relationship between investment and output, and then investment and output given by demand. Okay? So again, maybe this is a little abstract. I'm going to give you one other thing to think about then. Okay? Another reason why these views about savings and investment are important. Consider an increase in little s, in the savings rate. Okay? In the Solow model, what happens? Okay, little s goes up, investment goes up. Okay? Right? Because savings causes investment. And then, because investment goes up, little k goes up, right? We saw this already in one of our experiments. And therefore, because little k goes up, little y goes up. So, what does this mean? It means that when I increase the rate of savings, it leads to higher output per person. Conclusion then, what's the policy conclusion? If I have policies that stimulate savings, okay, policies that encourage people to save, that will increase per capita output. Now, interestingly, the Keynesian model says the opposite, right? Recall that in the Keynesian model, we have output determined by demand, and demand is just given by I over S. So now let's think through the logic of an increase in the savings rate. What happens if the government follows this advice? They increase the savings rate through some policy, I don't know, tax-free savings accounts or something, okay? What's the result? So S goes up, and then given this, output goes down, okay? We can think about it as output or output per worker. It doesn't matter in this case, but output goes down for a given number of workers. And why? Because when savings goes up, it limits the circular flow of income. What do I mean by that? It means that, think about our marble example. If instead of taking out 10% of marbles each time you got, the marbles were passed to you, if instead you were taking out, say, 50%, the marbles would go around the circle far less. They would change hands far less because we would we would run out of marbles quicker, I should say. And the same thing is happening here. When savings goes up, it limits the amount of demand in the economy. And therefore, when savings goes up in the Keynesian model, output goes down. And moreover, because of this decline in output, there will now be less investment. Why? Because if firms are trying to invest to meet demand, suddenly when demand goes down, I need to invest less, and so investment goes down. Okay? Conclusions from the Keynesian model: policies that stimulate savings will decrease per capita output and possibly lower the growth rate. Why? Because now firms will want to invest less on average. So notice that these two different views of savings and investment lead to very different conclusions about per capita output and about growth. Here are my concluding thoughts. So no doubt the instability in the Herod and Domar model makes it unappealing. Okay? We saw these two sources of instability, and then all we had to do was look at the real world and say, well, it doesn't actually seem to be happening, so, it's probably not a very good model. Now, however, there are Keynesian models of growth that avoid this instability. And I say here, as a real plug to myself that, for example, my MA thesis did this. This is what I worked on in my MA. It's not what I'm working on now, but it's what I worked on many years ago. The Solow model is one of the most famous models in macro. Okay, so in this sense, it's important to know. Even though it's not micro-founded, it's not, quote unquote modern macro, it's still very important to know. Okay, and this is why I say here, notice it was pre-Lucas critique. The Lucas critique happened in the 70s. This model was done in 1956, or was published in 1956. And so consequently, there's no explicit micro-foundations. And just to give you an example, notice here that savings is just a constant fraction of income. Okay, we're not modeling why, we're not modeling the consumer's choice of savings and having them choose optimally how much to save and how much to consume. Although later models you work on will endogenize this savings rate through explicit micro-foundations. That's it. Those are my concluding thoughts. This is my last lecture, so, thank you. I really enjoyed it. If you guys have any questions for me, I'm always, you can always communicate with me by email. And so thanks a lot. I hope you enjoyed it.